Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video we are going to be breaking down the Ruby Emerald Ratigan deck, doing a deck profile to show you kind of what the thought process is and concept is behind this deck. Linked in the description is the gameplay video, so make sure you check that out if you haven't already, but let's go ahead and jump straight in. Starting off, we've got a total of 27 Emerald and 34 Ruby cards, 53 Inkables and 8 Uninkables for a total of 61 cards, mostly characters in 46, a couple of songs in 11, 2 items and 2 actions. So a pretty decent curve overall. You should be able to play nicely up until turn 4, and then on turn 5 you start to have the option to decide what you want to do in terms of, do I want to start shifting characters, do I want to try to go for board control, tempo swings, that kind of thing. You can kind of establish that. So let's go ahead and jump into what we're actually playing. First of all, we've got 4 of the 1-drop Clarabelle. This card is extremely versatile. Not only is it the Clarabelle name for the potential shift later on, but in the future, after turn 1, you can also use the ability to pay an extra 2 to banish an item, which can be super critical. Banishing things like flutes if they're still in the meta, Queen's Sensor Core, Lucky Dimes, even small things like Popsicles. You know, you name it, Maurice's Workshop if the Ruby Sapphire deck is still around. Like a lot of versatility with this card potentially. So really happy to see it in the deck and being used to great effect. Next up, we've got Mulan. This is a character that comes in with 2 damage, and it's really relevant because if you are able to shift the big Ratigan on 4, what will actually happen is this Mulan will be a 4-3 body. A 4-3 body on turn 1 will probably take out anything that the opponent plays within the first 4 turns. So if you do facilitate the big Ratigan shift line, your damage characters get +2 strength. The Mulan will absolutely trade up, giving you a way to claw back tempo and take control of the match, especially if you are on the draw. The Ursula Deceiver is just one of the best 2-drops in the game. Not only can it rip a song out of your opponent's hand, but it also allows you to see their hand, which can help you facilitate your different lines of play, so it's a no-brainer there. Also, being a 1-3 body, it is a card that can sing and take the damage on Teeth and Ambitions, which I do think is coming back into the meta. Next up, we've got Mother Gothel, similar to Mulan on 2. With the damage that it gets on it, it will be a 5-4 body if by turn 4 your Mother Gothel survives and you still have the damage on it. The Ratigan shift will give her an extra 2 strength, making her an insanely valuable card. You know, 5 strength on turn 2, that's crazy, right? Or I guess technically on turn 4, but playing this character out on turn 2, waiting for her to get the strength boost is really, really strong. Next up, you got Clarabelle, the 3-cost Inkable 2-3 body that says when you play this character, if an opponent has more cards in their hand than you may draw a card. So on the play, when you're going first, this card is extremely powerful because it's very easy for you to proc this ability, given that you don't draw on turn 1 and you're playing your cards out first, and your opponent does draw for their first turn when you pass it over to them. When you are on the draw and your opponent is playing first and you have to draw the extra card for your first turn, it's a little bit harder to proc this ability. So most of the time on the draw this will be ink, but it's still a Clarabelle name that you can opt to play out to wait for the big shift if you can play out multiple interactions and like empty your hand very quickly. On the other side of the 3-drop, we've also got a Ratigan, Raging Rabbit. This is going to be your primary card to put into play for facilitating the shift 4 on the new 7-drop Ratigan, which we'll take a look at in a second. But this card coming into play being a 1-5 body is great. Again, it can absorb a lot of damage, and if it is damage, it has +2 strength permanently. Again, you can decide if you really want to go that route or not. I mean, like I said, mainly you're playing this out hoping to shift the Ratigan on turn 4 next turn. But again, even if you don't have it, this is a decent body that you can put out that can be difficult to out with the 5 willpower. Moving on to the 4-drop slot, you have another Ratigan name to help facilitate the shifts. This one does cost 4, so you lose a little bit of tempo if you play this one and then try to shift the big Ratigan on turn 5 onto this. But it does quest for 2 and it is evasive. And this card can be a little difficult to out for non-steel decks. If you're playing up against steel, you'll probably want to ink this because you don't want this to let the Storm Raged on, for example. But in most scenarios, this card is going to be pretty powerful because not a lot of decks are dealing pinging damage aside from steel. And this having 4 strength means that it dodges things like Medusa, Brawl, things like that. And it can run over a lot of things, including opposing Diablos, even when they're on the Hidden Cove or have a strength boost. So it's a pretty decent card overall, I think. And definitely something that's coming back into the meta as we see cards being focused on higher strength in order to play around some of the Ruby removal. In the other 4-drop slot, we have Goofy Super Goof. So this is a card that I think is pretty interesting because if you drop this while you have the Ratigan on field and you rush this into an opposing character, assuming that you out it, but even if you don't, when the Goofy has damage on him, assuming he doesn't get banished, he now becomes a 4/4 body. That means if your opponent tries to challenge back into the Goofy, they're likely going to lose their card. So this thing comes down, gets you some lore for the challenge, maybe it outs a threat, and then if your opponent tries to clap back and take out the Goofy because they don't want you taking out another threat now that it's a 4/4 body, they're going to also be losing a card most likely, because this thing will be a 4/4 with the Ratigan on field. Even without the Ratigan, it's still a solid card. I've talked about this before, but it just gets some additional synergy with the Ratigan, and that's why we opted to play it. Maui is a card that really gets a lot of utility in theory in this deck, because if you drop this and the Maui usually will go 2 for 1 and you run it into something, the Maui has some damage on it. If you have Ratigan on board, he becomes an 8/5 body, and then what you can do next turn if this thing lives and doesn't get outed is you can drop the Prince, or I keep calling it Prince John, the John Silver, which will give an opponent's character Reckless, which might force them to run into your Maui, and again, so assuming your Maui can survive, it will automatically trade out a character that you want off your opponent's board. So this card also facilitates a lot of nice things into the opponent's board, because if you have cards that are sitting there with damage and they're boosted up by the Ratigan, your John Silver, whenever it's played, or quests, will force your opponent to run into your boosted characters, meaning that you positively trade out. Like imagine playing this and forcing an opposing, I don't know, Tamatoa to run into a Maui instead of questing, right? Like they take 8 damage and the Tamatoa instantly gets outed, right? I'm just throwing something out there, but there's a lot of cool interactions that you can run with this deck, since, you know, a lot of your things will be boosted. Like imagine questing with a Mother Gothel, it being a 5/4 body, dropping a John Silver and forcing your opponent to run into the Mother Gothel, right? Because if you have the Ratigan shift, they can't usually with Reckless run into the Ratigan because it has evasive. So you can see a lot of the different lines that are facilitated with this Ratigan. Now the Clarabelle here, unfortunately in my gameplay video I didn't really use this card to full effect, but it is a very powerful card, and it's interesting to see where the price is. If you go back and watch my Emerald review, I think I did it either like the day the set was released or the day after or something, and this card was like $7 or something, $7 or $8 or $9, and I was talking about it and I was like, there's no way this card stays at this price because it's very good. And then the next day, literally after I posted that video, this card jumped in price. So the reason this card is so good, if you guys don't know, is that it basically says you draw cards, right? So if you're emptying your hand and your opponent is on, let's say, any kind of deck that draws cards, and what's really nice about this card is it really counters the Prince John discard decks, because obviously with Prince John, they're drawing a ton of cards and you're losing all your resources, right? If they have like 6 cards in hand and you're down to like 1 or 2, assuming you keep a Clarabelle and you drop the Clarabelle, you just draw 6, right? It's also good in a number of different kind of combinations or sequences, but it's an amazing card for this deck, because not only is it a big body, if you do get some damage on it, which, you know, with the 6 willpower, it's easy to just have some damage stick on here, it becomes a 7/6 with Ratigan on board, and it quests for 2, and then it usually will proc an ability for you to draw cards. It's just an insanely powerful card, and of course, you play 8 different shift targets for this thing. Yeah, this just a very powerful card overall. I think, yeah, this card is really underrated. The price definitely spiked up from where it was. You know, we'll do a market watch soon, but yeah, very interesting. And then we've got the Ratigan Party Crasher. So I'm only running 3 copies of this, but I was trying to run 4. I think you probably could get away with 4 since we play so little on Inkables. But this is definitely like a really powerful card. There was a Amber Ruby Mufasa list that in the first week of Shimmering Skies release ended up topping. I think it got top 4. I could be wrong. Maybe it just got top 8. But it was playing 2 copies of this Ratigan, because revealing this off Mufasa is also very strong. It comes in exerted, but it has evasive, so it's likely protected. Your damage characters get +2, and it quests for 3. This thing kind of reminds you of Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor, right? It comes in, it's a 5/5 body. It was questing for 4, and it had evasive. But that card, it was inkable, but it cost 8, and it took a long time to play it. This thing coming down on 4, being a 5/5 body that quests for 3 with evasive, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to remove this if they don't have the specific answer, something like a Zeus or what do you call it, World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which ironically enough is like a card for Ratigan, but it's an insanely powerful card, and it's the boss monster of your deck or the boss character. It can do a lot of work, and if you watch the gameplay video, I think it was in game 2 where I went first, this card just ran away with the game. Like, it was just insane, and I could have won even sooner, because I look back at that match and I'm like, yeah, there are a couple of things I could have done a little bit more optimally. Like, I could have shifted out the Ratigan on 4 instead of 5, but we'll get to like the reason why I did that a little bit later. Only 2 brawls. Again, you can opt for more, but ideally you want Teeth and Ambitions. So I just have this as extra removal because the Teeth and Ambitions does enough, I think, in order to try to out characters, the main ones anyways, that are going to be threats. Yes, Brawl is nice because it hits like Ursula Deceiver of All, whereas Teeth and Ambitions don't, but the Teeth and Ambitions mainly outs Diablo, and that's what you care about, as well as a couple of other small threats as well. So it does its job from what I can see. And then you got your Welcome. So this thing is, I don't want to say like one of your only removals, but it is very powerful for the versatility. Like even if you give your opponent a draw 2, which again can combo with Clarabelle, like you can sing this, make your opponent draw 2 cards, and then play your Clarabelle, and then you draw 2 as well. Like let's say you were both in top deck mode, right? Or you had one Clarabelle in hand and this card in hand, and your opponent has nothing in hand. You sing this, shuffle an item location character back into your opponent's deck, they draw 2, and then you play Clarabelle, and then you draw 2 as well. So there's like a lot of cool little lines you can play with this that combos with the Clarabelle. Of course, you can do your own stuff, put it back into the deck, and draw 2 as well. And I'm also on 2 Brunos for that. Almost same reason. It's either like Bruno and or your Welcome. You can run 4 of one and and 0 of the other, or vice versa. It's totally up to you. But this is just another form of hard removal for a character. Again, not that it should be too threatening, but I think having 2 copies in there, and it's inkable at worst, is not necessarily that bad for removal. And then again, just your board wiping, which can be sung with the Ratigan, which is really nice, and the Clarabelle, is Be Prepared. So we're running 3 copies of Be Prepared. You could run 4, again, totally up to you if you want to run like 4 Ratigan and or 4 Be Prepared, because you do run so little uninkables. In fact, I think those are the only uninkables we've reviewed so far. But we all know how strong Be Prepared is. It is one of the cards, just like with, in my opinion, John Silver, with the Clarabelle, with the rush characters you play, that can help you reset tempo. So like I said, you're playing on curve, kind of just reacting to your opponent's board when you're on the draw, and then once you hit 5, 6, 7, assuming you can continue to ink, that's when you decide, what do I want to do? Do I need to try to do a board reset with like a Be Prepared? Do I need to control the board with John Silver and rush down with Maui's? Do I, hopefully you establish a Ratigan early on, but, do I need to just develop bigger characters and threaten my opponent? Do I need to focus on removal? Do I need to Be Prepared? Or do I go this route? And I have gameplay of me using the Dinner Bell in game 2, and it actually more or less winning me the game, because if you play this card and you're able to resolve the draw, which is very easy because you have a lot of damaged characters on board and Teeth and Ambitions and whatnot, this card being able to draw you like 2 cards a turn, let's say, or more than that, because Mother Gothel comes in with 3 damage, Mulan with 2 damage, Teeth and Ambition deals 2 damage. Of course, you can keep challenging. Like you can Maui challenge, Goofy challenge, put 3 damage on this, put 4 damage on this, put 4 damage on John Silver. There's a lot of things that can take a lot of damage in this deck. The Ratigan too, that can take up to 4 damage. And then you Dinner Bell it away for 4. Like draw 4, draw 3, whatever. It only costs you 2 ink. And those draws are insanely powerful. Like you just drawing a bunch of cards and then just having multiple interactions, like I said, in order to tempo swing the game. The deck can actually function pretty well. Where it can fall behind or where it can suffer is if you don't end up seeing your card draw engines, right? If you don't see your Clarabelle, you don't see your Dinner Bell, you can run out of gas very quickly. So hopefully you do see those options at some point. It's very easy to control board state with this deck because again, you run 4 of the green removals, either like 4 You're Welcome, 4 Brunos, or a split between the 2. You have Brawls, you have Teeth and Ambitions, and you have Be Prepared, right? So a lot of ways to control the board. You just need ways to draw cards. And if you can do that with Clarabelle and Dinner Bell, that's kind of the concept behind this deck. You can kind of see a lot of the different synergies and combinations of things you can do. And it seemed to work pretty well. Like we did go 2-0, but my friend was using a Queen villain deck. May have to test this against more competitive decks, but it seemed to work fairly well when we did get the good lines of play. And again, because you do play fairly nicely on curve, given all of the 1 to 4 cost cards that we play, you should be able to play nicely on curve until you hit that 5, 6, 7, and then you can start deciding what to do. So all in all, there's a lot of cool things you can do. I think in the gameplay video, there was a nice little sequence I did where I sang the Teeth and Ambitions with Ratigan, put 2 damage on Ursula Deceiver, and took out one of my opponent's threats. And then Ursula Deceiver became a 3-3 body, and I had Mulan on board, which became a 4-3 body because it was damaged, and then I used the Mulan and the Ursula to just out 2 more threats on my opponent's board. So I was able to obviously rip a song with like Ursula, and then use her to take out a body, use Mulan to take out a body that costs, I think, 4, and she only costs 1, sang Teeth and Ambitions, took out another body. I took out 3 cards, right, with like very low cost cards here, and I still had like most of my ink or all of my ink available to do whatever I wanted to. And that's like, that is a play that can help you swing tempo and take control of the match, right? So I keep talking about this. Maybe I'll explain that concept a little bit more, like if you're not too familiar with TCGs and what that means. But essentially, if you're on the draw or you don't have control of the game, you're constantly like, I have to react to what my opponent is doing. You don't want to be in that state of a game, right? You want to be the one being the aggressor and saying like, I'm playing a card, you have to answer this, or I'm going to continue to put pressure on you and go for game, right? It's not a good feeling when your opponent keeps developing a threat and you're like, he just dropped this character or he just did this and I have to now react and try to deal with it. Otherwise he's gonna go for game or whatever, right? You want to switch that control. You want to switch that tempo, and this deck has a lot of tools to do that, both from a card advantage perspective and from kind of just a removal perspective, right? With the rush characters from Ruby, with the removal that Ruby offers, and even that Emerald. So yeah, you can see this deck, the concept behind it seems to be pretty interesting. It could probably be made a little bit more competitive. I'm not sure. Got to test it some more to see. But let me know what you think if you've made it this far in the video. Hopefully you enjoyed the deck profile and the insights. And again, make sure you check out the gameplay video if you haven't already. Thank you again for watching though. Quantum is out.